There are many types of weapons to deal damage in the lands between, but can you beat Elden Ring with just a torch? Not long after I was born, I became an anthropomorphic duck. Fresh out of the womb, it was time to venture into the lands between. I unalived myself to make sure I couldn't deal damage with anything but a torch. And we were off to find our first weapon of mass destruction. Met with a stalker to get Ducky's first pony. And headed south to Castle Morn for some unfinished business. Finally arriving at my designated location, I avoided the golem sniper to the best of my ability and entered Castle Morn. Witnessed a domestic dispute between lovers along the way and climbed the ladder up to the top and discovered the first weapon of the run, the wired torch. I then headed north for upgrade materials to improve the damage of our weapon. Also meeting my maker when I failed a speedrun skip that I'm not really good at. Making the jump a second time, I continued to collect upgrade materials and collect the key that would let me into Hogwarts High School. The next step was to make as much runes as possible with doing the least amount of work. So I threw myself into the Nether hoping that I would be yeeted into the universe, but ended up in Caelid. I greeted Parthenax along the way. Watched a Nazgul from Lord of the Rings go base jumping and earned 40k. Now it was time to level up. Then I decided to plunder a cavern for more upgrade materials and bully a Crystallian into giving me his bell bearing. With the upgrade materials, our weapon had gotten to +8. Now with the upgrades and the leveling, it was time for our first real boss, Margit the Fell Omen. There are a few things you should know about the torch before we proceed. For one, it doesn't have any critical animations, which means you can't riposte anybody after parrying them or get backstabs. Also, you can't equip other Ashes of War on the torch itself, and they also come with standard Ashes of War except for maybe 2 of them. So it's kind of a pain in the ass to use, even though the damage is good early. After burning Margaret with a lit birthday candle, I was on my way to Godric, the lord of the castle. I proceeded to burn off Godric's chest hairs until he decided to cut off his own hand and shove it in the ass of a dead dragon, as per usual. The fight went pretty routinely otherwise, and I was expecting a lot less damage at this point, but it seems like it would eventually die down, which it did. After brutally murdering his father, I beat Gastok to death with a lit piece of wood. Fight as he may, he hit like a dead baby, so guess who won? With the stench of burnt wood still on my armor, I proceeded to get both halves of the Dactus Medallion and work my way towards the Altus Plateau. Grabbed bell bearing number 2 and upgraded my weapon to +12. Killed another mistake of nature and booped a bad doggo on the snoot. Then used my powers of seduction on Hermione Granger of Winterhold College. It's weird, she didn't even really fight back. She let me slap her as many times as I felt like slapping her. Try as they might, they all fell to the power of the mighty torch. That was until the clusterfuck that was the Draconic Tree Knight, who was the first boss that we fought with real fire resistances. This boss fight took exactly 9 minutes. It was definitely a tough fight. I felt like a mosquito trying to kill an elephant, or like a grown man trying to kill a dog with a lit match. It took so long, I didn't know how much time had passed until I counted it out afterwards. Next I fought the Force Ghost Jedi version of Godfrey, who was actually not that bad. Even though we did very little damage, he's still pretty consistent. I still had a sour taste in my mouth from the Draconic Tree Knight, so I decided to take out my anger on a naked old man that lives in a cave. Next up was God's Mistake number 3, Martin, Margaret, Morgott, I don't really care. Damn George R.R. Martin for naming shit the way he does. It's fucking annoying to be honest with you. But it was a pretty rough fight as you would expect. He has high resistances, a big health pool, he's all over the map, it's hard to hit him. It was a long fight, not much to tell. It wasn't very interesting to watch. It kind of boring to do, honestly. It was impressive to some people. I don't know why. After getting bell bearing number 3, we upgrade our weapon to plus 18 and get ready for probably the worst fight in the whole entire game with a torch, the fire giant. Next, we proceeded north towards the boss that's known as the fire giant in the Mountaintops. I bet you can figure out why this fight wasn't the most fun. Maybe it's the fact that he has fire in his name. Maybe that his arena isn't very good. Maybe because the terrain is terrible. Maybe because it's uneven. Maybe because you can get trapped against a rock and his hitbox is ridiculous. Maybe because he flops around like a seal inside of a wet paper bag. But ultimately, yes, it was not a fun fight. It took exactly 15 minutes to dispatch him, unfortunately, and that was after 7 times of trying, which took me about an hour and a half just to get to that point. So yes, ultimately we beat him, but it was not a fun fight, and you can watch the whole thing on Facebook, the whole video's there, along with YouTube as well. Next, we proceeded to use a patched exploit that would break Moog, the Lord of Blood's AI, so that he can't move while we're in the arena. The only trick here is not to stagger him, and he will take damage and not fight back. If you don't like this, feel free to dislike the video. Yes, it's kind of like cheating, but it's also kind of fun and kind of crazy to see this happen, so I figured it was worth doing. Then I went to war with myself, and I won, mysteriously. Fought a large man on a very, 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 very tiny horse. How I felt bad for the horse. Executed a prison inmate. Beat to death the ghost of my ex-girlfriend with extreme prejudice. Sold what was left of my humanity for the last bowl of macaroni and cheese at the gargoyle fight, which was actually not that bad because they're not resistant to fire. If anything, they're weak to fire, I believe, because the torch pretty much melted them. Took a long detour through Detroit, Michigan just for some fun. Killed an insect that's on the endangered species list, and then we're on our way to one of the worst fights in the game with a torch, the foreskin duo. This boss fight with a torch goes from foreplay to pineapple sodomy in a matter of seconds. It's a terrible, terrible endeavor. I must have died here at least for 3 hours straight. I had to stop the stream here for a couple of days so I could farm the Albernuix in Moog's Empire area, so that I could become overpowered enough to actually use the torch and put enough stats into it to do some actual damage. Trina's torch is not very good. It takes like 7 or 8 hits to actually make them fall asleep. All I could really use is charge attacks basically in order to kill them. The fight was brutal as hell, but eventually we got it done. And on to the last boss of the area, the death doggo known as Meleketh, probably my favorite boss in the whole entire game. It wasn't necessarily a rough fight, but it's a very consistent fight for me because I like to fight very much. It was pretty fun with the torch, honestly, and kind of a different perspective on fighting him. After that, I proceeded to commit arson, my favorite felony of all time, especially when it comes to the lands between. And we walked up the Ashen Empire to fight Gideon the Know-It-All, who has infinite FP and infinite stamina, constantly casting, and on low damage runs isn't the most fun boss to fight, even though he's very easy on a standard run, but for some reason he's almost impossible with low damage. Isn't that funny the way that works out? And on to Papa Horaloo, the real non-Force Ghost version of him, with the big old axe. I love his second phase. It's like your grandpa broke open the Ultimate Warrior stash of booger sugar and steroids in the second half of this. It's one of my favorite things about this game, actually, is the second half of this fight. But ultimately, he was bested by the torch. He should know better not to bring an axe to a torch fight. And here we are, upon the throne of the Elden Ring. At the very end, at the very last boss fight. Torch versus Hammer. Radagon versus Duck. But the torch only knows death and violence and destruction, and is an agent of destruction, an agent of the apocalypse, of the wasteland from beyond. It took 8 minutes for the Loch Ness Monster to be bested and hand me the $3 he owes me. And it was over, and I beat Elden Ring with just a torch. Well, it's going to have to do it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you didn't, please leave a dislike. If you liked it, please leave a like. Please consider following me on YouTube, on Kick, and on Facebook. Thank you so much for watching.